July 10th, 1943, Sicily burned beneath the Mediterranean sun. The sand shimmered like fire. The air trembled with the sound of machine guns and the screams of men trying to stay alive. It was the first day of Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Axis-held Europe, and on a small stretch of Sicilian beach, an impossible story was about to unfold. American soldiers of the 3rd Infantry Division crawled through the dunes. Trapped under relentless German fire, bullets snapped through the air, churning the sand into clouds of dust. Each second felt like an eternity. The enemy nest, hidden inside a concrete bunker, spat death across the open ground. No man could stand up without being cut down. Private John Rowell pressed his body into the earth, his face covered in grit and blood. Beside him, trembling but alert, was a dog, a mixed-breed shepherd with golden-brown fur, a black muzzle, and eyes that refused to show fear. His name was Chips. No one could move. No one dared. The Germans had perfect range and endless ammunition. The plan was collapsing before it had even begun. But Chips did not wait for an order. A moment earlier, a mortar shell had exploded behind them, and the shockwave had torn the leash from Rowell's hands. Now, the dog was free. What happened next would become one of the most extraordinary acts of bravery in the history of war, an act that no general planned, no soldier commanded, and no human could have predicted. Rowell shouted for Chips to stay, but the dog was already moving, ears flattened, body low, a blur of fur and fury across the sand. He darted between shell craters, weaving through smoke and chaos, heading straight toward the flashes of German gunfire. For the men pinned down, it was madness. For Chips, it was instinct loyalty, courage, and the raw need to protect his human pack. The German gunners saw him coming. They opened fire. Bullets tore up the sand around him. Chips didn't stop. He vanished into the smoke. For a moment, there was silence. And then screaming. The sound of a struggle inside the bunker. Shouts in German, a single gunshot, and then nothing. Seconds later, one soldier stumbled out of the machine gun nest, clutching his arm, bleeding. Behind him came another, then another, all raising their hands in surrender. And then, emerging from the dark doorway, came Chips limping. His face burned from gunpowder, teeth still bared, tail low but wagging. The men couldn't believe what they were seeing. A dog had just captured a German machine gun position. When Rowell reached him, Chips collapsed into his arms, exhausted but alive. In his report, Rowell wrote simply, "Chips rushed the pillbox, attacked the gunners, and forced their surrender. He saved our platoon." Word spread through the ranks within hours. Soldiers whispered about the dog hero of Sicily. Newspapers back home would later call him the four-legged soldier who did the impossible. But for now, there was no cheering, just awe, and a strange silence. The men who had witnessed it were changed. They had seen courage in its purest form, unthinking, uncalculated, unafraid. To understand what made this moment so powerful, you have to know where Chips came from. He wasn't born in a barracks or trained in a military kennel. He was a family pet from Pleasantville, New York. His owners, the Wren family, had raised him since he was a puppy. When America entered the war, the government launched a program called Dogs for Defense. Families across the country were asked to donate their pets to serve in the armed forces to guard, scout, and save lives. Virginia Wren, the family's teenage daughter, kissed Chips goodbye at the train station. She tied a small blue ribbon around his collar and whispered, "Come home soon, boy." She never imagined her dog would become a legend. At training camp, Chips learned to obey hand signals, crawl silently, and attack on command. He could detect explosives buried in the ground, deliver messages between units, and wake soldiers during night patrols. But more than his skills, trainers noticed something rare: a natural intelligence, a sensitivity to human emotion. He knew when a man was afraid, and he refused to leave anyone behind. That morning in Sicily, under a hail of bullets, those instincts took over. Chips didn't care about tactics or orders. He cared about survival, his own, and the men who trusted him. In that brief, blinding moment, he chose to do the one thing every soldier dreamed of doing but couldn't: break the stalemate, and he succeeded. After the firefight, Chips was treated for burns and a grazing wound on his head. He was given water, bandaged, and in the chaotic humor that only soldiers understand, fed half a can of rations and a cookie. Later that day, the platoon advanced inland, now free from the deadly machine gun that had pinned them down. Each man who passed the bunker looked at it differently, not as a fortress, but as the place where a dog had changed the course of their day, and perhaps their fate. That night, under the faint light of a Sicilian moon, Private Raoul wrote in his diary, "He's more than a dog. He's one of us." In the days that followed, military correspondents heard the story and sent it home. Newspapers printed headlines like, "Dog hero in Sicily storms enemy gun. Chip saves his unit from certain death." America fell in love with the idea of a canine soldier who embodied loyalty and courage, proof that even in a war built on destruction, there was still room for heart. But fame is fleeting. Chips would soon be pulled into controversy, his medals revoked, his story nearly erased from official records. Yet the truth of what he did that day, witnessed by men whose lives he saved, could never be undone. For in the chaos of Sicily, when even the bravest soldiers hesitated, one dog didn't. And that's where our story begins. From family pet to soldier. Before the war, Chips had no idea what the world was capable of. He belonged to the Wren family of Pleasantville, New York, a quiet, middle-class family living in a small white house with a picket fence and a backyard where the dog chased sticks and barked at mailmen. He was part German Shepherd, part Collie, and part Husky, strong, loyal, intelligent. The kind of dog that never needed a leash, because he never wanted to be far from home. The Wrens adored him. Virginia, their teenage daughter, often said that Chips was her best friend. He slept at the foot of her bed, guarded the yard like a soldier, and accompanied her on long walks to the nearby Hudson River. Life was ordinary, safe, predictable, until December 7th, 1941, the day Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The sound of war didn't reach Pleasantville immediately, but within weeks, everything changed. Men were enlisting, factories began producing weapons, and the government launched an unusual campaign called Dogs for Defense. Posters appeared in town squares and newspapers. Your dog can serve his country. Donate your pet to the war effort. Families across America were asked to loan or donate their dogs to the military. The idea seemed strange, even cruel, to many, but others believed it was a patriotic duty. The Wrens hesitated. Virginia cried. Yet, in the end, she made the choice herself. On a cold morning in 1942, she tied a blue ribbon around Chips's collar and whispered, "Be brave. Boy, come home safe." Then she handed the leash to an army handler. Chips wagged his tail, unaware that this would be his last look at home for years. At the training base in Front Royal, Virginia, Chips joined hundreds of dogs from across the country, shepherds, collies, Dobermans, even terriers. The air was filled with barking, commands, and the metallic smell of discipline. Trainers were strict but patient. They had never built a canine army before. Chips learned fast. He mastered obedience, scent detection, and hand signal communication. He was fearless of loud noises, an essential trait for a battlefield. He could crawl silently under barbed wire, leap fences, and stay motionless for hours in the dark. But what impressed the trainers most wasn't his skill. It was his heart. When a soldier stumbled during drills, Chips would run to his side. When gunfire echoed, he didn't hide, he looked toward it. Within months, he earned the rank of sentry dog, attached to the 3rd Military Police Platoon, 3rd Infantry Division. His job, guard camps, scout for ambushes, and warn soldiers of danger. He was assigned to Private John P. Raoul, a quiet, steady man from Pennsylvania, who treated the dog less like property and more like a partner. Raoul and Chips became inseparable. They slept beside each other, shared rations, and patrolled the perimeters of training camps together. When Raoul wrote letters home, he sometimes signed them, "From John and Chips." Other soldiers teased him, but they all grew to love the dog too. Chips had a strange ability to lift morale. In a world of fear and fatigue, his presence reminded them of home, of warmth, laughter, and the simple things they were fighting for. By the time 1943 arrived, the 3rd Infantry Division was preparing for something massive, the invasion of Europe, starting with North Africa and then Sicily. Soldiers trained endlessly, studying maps, cleaning rifles, running through mock beach landings. Chips joined every drill, barking at the ocean as if daring it to fight back. When the transport ship finally left for the Mediterranean, Chips stood on the deck beside Raoul, ears back against the wind. Below them, the ocean stretched endlessly. The men joked that he was the only one on board who didn't get seasick. During the voyage, the men often gathered to pet him, talk to him, or simply sit near him in silence. They called him the dog who never sleeps. Even at night, he stood guard, pacing the deck, growling softly whenever a strange sound echoed across the waves. He was a reminder that vigilance could coexist with loyalty, that courage didn't always wear a uniform. On July 9th, 1943, as the convoy approached the Sicilian coast, the mood on board changed. The men were quiet. Some prayed, others cleaned their weapons one last time. Raoul sat with Chips, stroking his fur. "Stay close. Boy," he whispered, "tomorrow's going to be bad." Chips tilted his head, sensing the unease. Dogs don't understand war, but they understand fear, and they understand love. That night, the sea grew rough. Searchlights flashed in the distance. Artillery rumbled from the shore. The invasion had begun. At dawn, the order came. Raoul and Chips climbed into a landing craft with dozens of soldiers, faces painted, hearts pounding. Rain and salt sprayed across their faces. Chips stood at the front, nose in the wind, tail stiff. The boat slammed into the beach, and chaos erupted. Explosions tore through the air. The first wave of troops rushed forward, but German fire pinned them down immediately. The beach was a killing field. Raoul threw himself behind a sand dune, pulling Chips close. Bullets whistled overhead. Screams echoed. The smell of gunpowder filled the lungs. In moments like these, training disappears. There's no time for orders, no room for thought, only instinct. And Chips's instinct was stronger than fear. He could hear the gunfire coming from one direction, a nest of machine guns hidden behind a mound of sand and stone. Every time the weapon fired, men fell. Chips barked, low and furious. Raoul tried to hold him back, gripping the leash tight. "No. Boy, stay." But fate doesn't listen to reason. A nearby explosion ripped through the sand, shattering their cover. The leash snapped. Chips looked back once, eyes locked with Raoul's, and then, without waiting for a command, he ran. That single decision, that leap from safety into the storm, would make Chips a legend. Within minutes, he would change the course of a battle, save dozens of lives, and prove something the world had nearly forgotten: that courage is not exclusive to humans. When soldiers talk about bravery, they speak of orders followed, medals earned, missions completed. But true courage is something quieter. The decision to act when every instinct says hide. That morning on the beaches of Sicily, it didn't come from a general or a hero in uniform. It came from a dog with no understanding of glory, only love. The landing in Sicily. Before dawn on July 10, 1943, the sea around Sicily was black and heavy, a vast plain of rolling metal under a moon hidden by cloud. In the darkness, hundreds of landing craft crept toward the shore, engines muffled, soldiers silent. Somewhere among them, Private John Raoul crouched beside his partner Chips. The dog's ears twitched at every sound. His nose quivered, catching scents no human could name. The invasion had begun, Operation Husky, the Allies' first step into Fortress Europe. Raoul could feel the tremor of his own heartbeat. The air stank of salt and diesel. Water slapped the hull in short, nervous bursts. He reached down and scratched the dog's neck. "Easy, boy," he murmured, almost there. Chips pressed against his leg, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. A whistle shrieked. The boat pitched forward. Spray hit their faces cold, briny, waking. Ahead, flashes of orange tore through the sky. Coastal guns. The horizon erupted. Within seconds, the night turned to chaos searchlights. Tracer fire, the thud of shells finding water. The first landing craft vanished in plumes of smoke. Men shouted, ducked, prayed. When their ramp dropped, the world roared. Raoul jumped first, water up to his chest, rifle held high. Around him, soldiers splashed, stumbled, crawled through surf that glowed white under explosions. Bullets hissed like hornets. Somewhere in that maelstrom, Chip swam beside him, paddling fiercely. Every blast seemed to knock the sea sideways, yet the dog never faltered. They made the beach a strip of sand, carved by barbed wire and machine gun fire. The platoon scattered for cover behind low dunes. Someone yelled that the Germans had a bunker on the ridge, a hidden nest, spitting death. No one could see it clearly. The muzzle flashes came from behind a line of rocks, precise and merciless. Raoul flattened himself in the sand. Chips crouched next to him, panting, eyes darting. The air vibrated with gunfire. Each burst kicked up a storm of dust and shredded seaweed. The men tried to return fire, but the angle was wrong. They were pinned. Minutes passed like hours. Then a mortar exploded behind them, too close. Sand rained down. The blast snapped the leash from Raoul's wrist. Chips froze for a heartbeat, then bolted. "Chips!" Raoul screamed. But the dog was already gone, a streak of brown and black cutting through the smoke. Soldiers shouted after him, a chorus of disbelief and helpless awe. Bullets tore up the beach in his wake. He veered left, then right, darting between craters, body low, tail straight, moving faster than fear. The German gunners noticed too late. Their aim wavered as the animal vanished into the haze. Raoul pushed up on his elbows, watching. All he could see was sand, wire, and smoke until a strangled cry echoed from the bunker. Then another. Gunfire stopped mid-burst. Silence for a long moment. No one moved. The only sounds were the wind and the moan of the wounded. Then, from the concrete opening, a shape emerged, a German soldier, stumbling, holding his bleeding arm. Behind him came two more, dropping their weapons, eyes wide with terror. They were shouting a single word over and over. Hund, Hund, dog. And then Chips appeared. He limped into view, muzzle black with soot, a strip of torn fabric hanging from his teeth. His fur was singed, his eyes half closed from the smoke. Yet he still stood tall, chest heaving, tail flicking weakly. Raoul ran to him, ignoring the bullets that still cracked somewhere far down the beach. He knelt, pulled the dog into his arms, and for a moment, the war disappeared. Chips pressed his head against the soldier's chest, trembling but alive. "Good boy," Raoul whispered. "Good boy." Behind them, the platoon advanced. The captured bunker gave cover for the next wave of troops. The machine gun was silent now, its barrel cooling in the breeze. What no human could reach. A single dog had conquered. Later, when the line pushed inland, Raoul wrapped Chips's burned face with a strip of cloth torn from his own sleeve. The medic laughed through exhaustion. "That mutt's tougher than any of us," he said. That night, under a dim Sicilian moon, the men of the 3rd Infantry Division finally rested. They spoke softly, voices hoarse. Some prayed, others simply stared at the stars. Too tired to think, Chips lay beside Raoul, head on his boot. Every so often his legs twitched, chasing dreams only he could see. Raoul opened his journal and wrote, "He charged a gun today. Don't know why he did it. Maybe he thought they were after me. Maybe that's enough of a reason." News of the dog spread fast. Within hours, messengers were carrying the story up the chain of command. By the end of the week, the name Chips was whispered in tents and trenches across the division. To some, he was a mascot. To others, a miracle. But in the quiet moments, when the noise of battle faded, what the soldiers remembered most wasn't the victory. It was the sight of that dog running headlong into fire. Not for orders, not for glory, but for love. In Var, men often lose their humanity to survive. Chips reminded them they still had it. Part 4, the charge. The morning light over Sicily had turned a sickly gray. Smoke drifted like ghosts across the dunes, blotting out the sun. The smell of cordite, salt, and blood hung thick in the air. Soldiers from the 3rd Infantry Division crouched behind the wreck of a landing craft, trading bursts of fire with the unseen German nest on the ridge. Every attempt to move forward ended the same way, a volley of bullets chewing the sand to pieces. Private John Raoul pressed his back against the steel hull, breathing hard. His hands shook as he reloaded. Beside him, Chips sat rigid, ears pricked, eyes locked on the flashes of the enemy gun. The dog's fur was coated with dust, his chest rising and falling in sharp, quick breaths. He wanted to move. Every muscle said run, every instinct said protect. Raoul tightened his grip on the leash. Easy. Boy, stay. But the command sounded thin, even to his own ears. Chips's eyes never left the ridge. Another burst came, tracer fire carving red lines through the haze. A mortar exploded behind them, throwing grit and hot wind over their faces. The leash snapped. Chips bolted. For a fraction of a second, Raoul reached after him, hand clawing at the air, but the dog was already gone. Across the open sand he ran, body low, tail straight, moving with a speed that seemed unreal amid the slowness of fear. The world blurred around him. Soldiers yelled, "Call him back," but their voices drowned in the roar of machine guns. Bullets shredded the ground behind him. But the angles were wrong. The gunners had built their bunker to stop men, not something small and fast and full of fury. Chips zigzagged, vanishing into smoke, reappearing only as a streak of movement. 50 yards, 30, 15, then he was gone from sight. Raoul's stomach turned to ice. He couldn't see the bunker, only hear it, that relentless clatter of metal on metal. Then, suddenly, a different sound, a shout, high and sharp, in German, another. The firing stopped mid-burst. Silence. The men froze, exchanging glances. Someone whispered, "What the hell just happened?" Then came a single gunshot from inside the nest, followed by a cry, and then nothing. Raoul couldn't stand it. He broke cover and ran. Sand pounded under his boots. Smoke stung his eyes. The closer he got, the clearer the scene became. The bunker's mouth still smoking. A figure stumbling out, clutching a bleeding arm. Another following with hands raised, shouting "Hund," dog. A third crawled after them, eyes wild. They dropped their weapons onto the sand, and from the darkness behind them emerged Chips. His head was low, his mouth streaked with soot. One ear was torn, and a burn marked the fur along his neck. Yet he was walking slow, determined, tail wagging faintly, as though to announce it's over. Raoul reached him first. "Chips," he shouted, voice cracking. The dog staggered toward him and collapsed into his arms, breathing hard. The world seemed to hold its breath. When the platoon caught up, they stood in a ring around the captured gun, inside the bunker. The air reeked of smoke and gunpowder. The heavy MG-42 lay on its side, barrel warped from heat. One of the gunners was moaning. Another sat dazed, staring at the small hole in the wall where Chips had forced his way through. Claw marks scored the dirt. Sergeant Stanley knelt beside the weapon and let out a low whistle. "I'll be damned," he said. He took the whole crew. Someone laughed a short, disbelieving laugh. Then silence returned. The men looked at the dog, at the bunker, then at each other, as though trying to make sense of what bravery meant. Raoul poured water from his canteen into his hand and held it to Chips's mouth. The dog licked weakly, eyes half closed. A medic arrived, shook his head in wonder, and wrapped a bandage around the burn. "He's lucky," the medic said. "Or maybe we are." That afternoon, word spread along the beach. Officers came, took photographs, wrote notes. The story passed from company to company, growing with every retelling. By evening, Chips had become a legend, the dog who stormed a gun nest. But in that moment, none of it mattered to Raoul. He sat with Chips in the shade of the ruined bunker, one hand on the dog's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Around them, the battle still raged, distant explosions. Orders shouted through radios, yet here, amid the wreckage, there was peace. He opened his journal and wrote, "He saved us all. Don't know what drove him, fear, loyalty, or love. But he did what no man dared." That night, when the division finally pushed inland, the men of the 3rd Infantry carried Chips's story with them. They passed it around campfires and trenches, each version a little different, but all ending the same way, the moment a dog charged into hell and came back alive. In the darkness, Raoul slept with Chips beside him. Every time the dog twitched in dreams, Raoul woke and whispered, "You're safe now, boy. You're safe, far from home, surrounded by ruin." That single living heartbeat beside him was a reminder of something purer than victory. Courage can be taught, strategy can be planned, but loyalty simply is, and on that scorched Sicilian beach, loyalty had taken the form of a dog named Chips. The day after the assault, the beach at Gela looked like another planet. Broken vehicles, twisted helmets, and the faint smell of cordite lingered over the sand. Somewhere near the shattered bunker, a small shape limped among the debris. A dog with a bandaged neck and eyes that followed every movement of his handler. Chips was alive, but barely. Private John Rowell carried him to the field dressing station, ignoring the mud and the stares of medics who had never treated an animal patient before. Burns on the left shoulder, powder flash to the muzzle, small graze to the skull, one medic muttered, wrapping gauze with a gentleness reserved for children. When they were done, Chips licked the man's wrist. The tent fell silent. For the men who had seen him charge the gun, that small gesture meant more than any medal. Still, the Army had rules, and the Army loved paperwork. By evening, reports describing the incident were already moving up the chain of command. Captain Edward Park, commanding officer of the platoon, signed the first dog, Chips 3rd Inf. Div. Displayed exceptional bravery in single-handedly neutralizing enemy positions 27. The words were simple, almost dry, yet they carried across headquarters like wind through grass. Within a week, the story reached division headquarters, then the Stars and Stripes newspaper, and finally Washington. In August 1943, the order came back. Award Silver Star and Purple Heart to K-9 soldier Chips for gallantry in action. Rowell read the telegram twice before it sank in. He looked down at the dog sleeping by his cot, tail twitching in dreams. "Guess you're one of the boys now," he said quietly. When the ceremony happened, it was small, no parade, no brass band, just a patch of Sicilian dirt, a few dozen tired soldiers, and a chaplain who improvised the oath. Rowell knelt beside Chips while an officer pinned a tiny silver star ribbon to his collar. The men cheered. Someone whistled. A photographer clicked a single frame that would later appear in newspapers back home. A soldier, a dog, and a smile that seemed to defy the whole madness of war. That photo changed everything, overnight. Chips became a national symbol. Articles called him the hero dog of Sicily. Radio hosts spoke of him as if he were a myth come to life. Children in classrooms wrote letters addressed simply to Chips. Somewhere in Italy, the Army Public Relations Office embraced the story, sending out press releases that described the dog as an inspiration to every American soldier. For a brief moment, Chips represented something the public desperately needed, a reminder that decency and loyalty could survive even in the dirt of battle. He was proof that the war, for all its horror, still contained fragments of innocence. But not everyone in the military shared the sentiment. At the Pentagon, a group of senior officers reviewed the case with discomfort. Awards like the Silver Star and Purple Heart were reserved for human service members. There were regulations, and regulations did not bend easily. Behind closed doors, memos circulated using words like precedent, discipline, and public misunderstanding. One colonel finally summarized the problem bluntly. "Decorating a dog cheapens the medal." Another replied, "Maybe it ennobles it." The debate lasted weeks. Then the ruling came down. Chips's medals were to be rescinded. No ceremony this time, no explanation to the troops. Just a brief notice filed away in military archives. All citations awarded to animals are hereby annulled. When Rowell heard the news, he said nothing. He folded the telegram and placed it in his pocket. That evening, he found Chips gnawing a piece of wood outside the mess tent, blissfully unaware of politics or pride. Rowell sat beside him, scratching the dog's neck. "You don't need a medal," he whispered. "You already did more than any of us." In the months that followed, Chips continued to serve in Italy, France, and Germany. He guarded prisoners, patrolled airfields, and alerted troops to ambushes before they happened. Everywhere he went, soldiers recognized him. They'd crouch down, rub his ears, and tell him stories he couldn't understand, but somehow seemed to comfort them anyway. By 1945, when victory finally came, Chips was weary. His coat was scarred, his muzzle graying. The Army began demobilizing its canine units, and the Wrens received a letter offering to return him home. When Virginia opened the envelope, she cried. It had been 3 years since she'd watched him leave. Now she waited at the same train station, holding the same blue ribbon. When the freight car door slid open, a soldier stepped down first. Then a blur of brown fur leapt into her arms. Chips barked once, twice, tail beating like a drum. The station erupted in cheers. Photographers captured the reunion. The picture ran on the front page of the Sunday Times. Hero dog returns home. To Virginia, he wasn't a hero. He was family. To Raoul, he was a brother. To history, he was a problem that didn't fit neatly into any regulation. Chips lived only a short time after the war. He died in 1946, buried under a maple tree behind the Wren house. Virginia placed his old collar on the grave and tied the blue ribbon around it once more. No medals, no headlines, just a simple wooden sign. Chips, he did his duty. For decades, his story faded into the footnotes of military archives. But in 2018, 75 years after Sicily, the U.S. Army finally corrected the record. Chips was posthumously awarded the Medal of Bravery, the highest honor for an animal in service. At the ceremony, a modern-day military dog stood in his place. Virginia Wren's granddaughter accepted the plaque. Reporters asked her what the family thought of the recognition. She smiled and said, "He never cared about medals. He just cared about people." In the end, Chips's controversy revealed something larger than policy. The argument had never been about a ribbon or a medal. It was about what courage means. Was bravery measured in orders followed, or in hearts willing to risk everything for another life? The Army feared that honoring an animal blurred the line between discipline and emotion. But maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. Because in a war that often turned men into machines, a single dog had reminded them of compassion. When historians list the great heroes of World War II, they name generals, soldiers, and politicians. But somewhere, on a quiet beach in Sicily, the ghost of a shepherd-collie mix still runs through smoke and fire, ears pinned back, eyes bright, charging not for country or command, but for love. Long after the guns fell silent, long after the cheers of victory faded into memory, the battlefields of Europe were still haunted by ghosts. Not just the ghosts of soldiers, but of the countless silent companions who had marched, carried, guarded, and bled beside them, among the rubble and ruins of a war that reshaped the world. The name Chips might have seemed small, just a dog, a passing story, but his paw prints reached farther than any headline could measure. His courage was not born of ideology or command. It was born of something older, simpler, and purer: love. In the years that followed World War II, armies changed. Tanks replaced horses, radios replaced messengers, machines replaced muscle. Yet, even as technology advanced, every soldier who'd fought alongside an animal remembered what it meant to look into the eyes of a creature that didn't understand politics or strategy, only trust. For the men of the 3rd Infantry Division, Chips was never just a mascot. He was a symbol of what they wanted to believe still existed inside themselves, the part untouched by hatred or fear. When the war ended and they returned home, many kept small reminders: a patch, a letter, a faded photograph. Raoul kept something else: a strip of leather from Chips's old collar. It hung on a nail above his desk until the day he died. When people asked him about the war, he rarely spoke of the battles. He spoke of a dog. He didn't wait for orders, Raoul would say. He just did what was right. That simple sentence carried more weight than any medal or speech. Across the world, thousands of animals shared Chips's fate: dogs that carried messages through enemy fire, horses that pulled artillery through mud and snow, pigeons that flew across storm clouds to deliver hope, elephants that dragged bridges across rivers in Burma, even cats that hunted rats aboard Navy ships to keep disease away. Most of them never had names known beyond their handlers. Few had graves, but each, in their quiet way, made survival possible. In London, there stands a monument in Hyde Park, the Animals in War Memorial. Its inscription reads, "They had no choice." Those 4 words cut deeper than any speech about valor. They remind us that these creatures, drafted by human hands into human wars, acted not from ideology but from instinct, and in doing so, They often displayed the purest form of courage, because courage, stripped of ambition or reward, is simply the will to protect. Chips's story spread slowly across generations. Teachers told it in classrooms, soldiers retold it to new recruits, and families shared it around dinner tables as proof that even in the darkest chapters of history, goodness had not vanished. In 2018, when the U.S. Army finally awarded him the Medal of Bravery, it was not about rewriting history, it was about healing it. At the ceremony, a modern military working dog stood on stage, wearing a vest marked K9 service. A general saluted the memory of Chips and every animal who had served in silence. In the audience sat veterans in wheelchairs, old men with trembling hands, some wiping tears. For them, the honor wasn't about a dog from 75 years ago. It was about remembering that when men lose their humanity, animals often bring it back. History tends to record only those who command, not those who obey. But obedience itself, when born of trust, can be a sacred act. Chips's charge into that Sicilian bunker wasn't strategy. It was instinct, a reaction to danger, to fear, to loyalty. He didn't know the names of nations or the difference between right and wrong as people define it. He only knew that his friend was in danger, and that to save him, he would have to run toward the sound everyone else was running from. That's what made it powerful. That's what made it human. Every war has its legends. Moments where the line between madness and bravery blurs, where survival seems to depend on something more than bullets or luck. For the soldiers who watched Chips disappear into that cloud of smoke, that line vanished entirely. He didn't charge for country, or victory, or medals. He charged because he loved someone, and in doing so, he reminded every man on that beach what they were really fighting for: the simple right to go home, to protect those they loved, to live without fear. Years later, one veteran wrote in his memoir, "We had rifles, bombs, and training, but that day, it was a dog who showed us what courage looked like." That sentence, buried in the pages of an old book, might as well be Chips's epitaph. If you visit Pleasantville, New York, and walk behind the small white house where he once lived, you'll find a patch of grass beneath a maple tree. The wooden sign is gone now, weathered away by time. But if you listen, really listen, when the wind rustles through the leaves, you might imagine the sound of paws on gravel, a bark echoing in the distance. History moves on, empires rise and fall, but loyalty, the kind that crosses species and defies fear, remains. For every man who ever fought, there was a dog who stood beside him. For every battle won, there was a horse who pulled the weight of war. For every letter delivered, a pigeon who flew through fire. And for every victory, somewhere, there was a creature who had no reason to fight, but did anyway. In the end, Silent Heroes is not just the story of one dog. It is the story of us, of what we are capable of when we act not out of duty, but out of love. Because in the chaos of war, when orders collapse and fear takes hold, the truest heroes are often the ones who cannot speak, yet say everything through the way they act. So remember them. Remember Chips, the shepherd mix, who charged into a machine gun nest in Sicily. Remember the animals who carried, guarded, delivered, and died beside men who often didn't deserve them. And remember what they teach us still: that bravery isn't loud, that love doesn't need language, and that sometimes the most human act of all comes from a heart that doesn't even know it's human.